Welcome, everyone. I would like to start by thanking David Dietze and Claire Toth with Point View for including the Visual Arts Center of New Jersey in today's webinar. Point View has been a part of our community for 27 years, and David and Claire are wonderful supporters of the arts, and each sit on multiple charitable boards, are committed to all of Summit's nonprofits, and want to help you in your charitable planning. The Arts Center is the state's largest visual arts organization dedicated to the creation, appreciation, and understanding of contemporary art. Organizations like us rely heavily on philanthropic gifts from donors like you, especially in times like this. We are so grateful to our community for continuing to support us during the pandemic. The recent shutdown prevented us from conducting our spring camps and classes, and the resulting loss of earned income makes charitable giving even more vital to our health and sustainability right now. The CARES Act provided some new rules regarding gifts to nonprofits, and I would like to now turn it over to David and Claire so they can tell you more about how to get more bang for your charitable buck.
So thank you so much, Susan. I'm David Dietze, President and Founder of Point View Wealth Management, and my partner here today will be Claire Toth. And before we get started, I just want to tell you all how lucky we are to have the Visual Arts Center here in Summit. Remember, it's not the Summit Visual Arts Center, it's the New Jersey Visual Arts Center. We're so lucky to have something that is such a great resource for the arts right here in my adopted home city. I can't tell you how many times I've gone over there and seen artwork on the wall, heard lectures, even had my children take classes over there and thought, gee, we are so lucky to have this resource right here. I'm big buds with Melanie Cohn, who's the executive director. She wishes everyone her best. She's working very, very hard. And over the last couple of years, I've gotten to know Susan as well, who also lives here right in Summit and is dedicated to furthering the mission of the Visual Arts Center. So one thing to always keep in mind, how lucky we are to have that resource, but these things we are in challenging times. Everything costs a lot. Times are tough. Please, when you're considering your charitable gifts, please consider the Visual Arts Center. Now, what I want to do here is just talk a little bit about, who is Point View and why are we speaking in front of you. As noted, we are in Summit, New Jersey. We've been here over on Springfield Avenue, opposite Peppercorn, in the good old Bassett building for over 25 years. We are a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Why does that matter? We have to, by law, and of course we do by temperament, adhere to the highest fiduciary standards. We are now lucky to be part of PPAC Private, which is a wealth management division of publicly traded local financial institution, PPAC Gladstone Bank, which has nearly $7 billion under management. So what do we do? How do we help people? We invest their money in a customized fashion, tailored to what their needs and desires are. We also provide soup to nuts financial planning. That's under the auspices of Claire Toth. We work mainly for private people, families, individuals. We are lucky enough to help some small institutions. Now, we're all about not just making money, but making money after paying taxes. So we always are focusing on tax efficiency, and we use transparency by going directly to individual stocks and bonds as opposed to through intermediaries like funds. $500,000 relationship minimum, 1% annual fee, and that actually can be cost savings versus also paying the underlying fees of funds and exchange traded funds often used by other advisors. We also offer a standalone financial planning package for a flat fee, and if people go forward and have some of their money managed by us, that's credited dollar for dollar. And of course, asset security is always job one. All of our clients' assets are custodied at Fidelity Investments, a world leader in accounts in their own name. So Claire and I don't do it by ourselves. We are so lucky to have a great group of guys and gals that support us. You can see our team here, here in the hallway of the historic Bassett Building on Springfield Avenue. We've been very lucky to have been recognized nationally for our work on behalf of our clients. So let's get into the meat of our presentation. And if there's one thing you all take away is when you're getting ready to make those charitable contributions, you're pulling out that checkbook, you're grabbing your pen, our message here is wait. There's always a better way to give that same gift to the charity, but to do it in allowing you to pay less in taxes. In other words, they get the same amount, but you're paying less because you're reducing the take of Uncle Sam. And that's what we're all about. So as Susan alluded to, there's been some major changes this year as our government in Washington has developed new legislation to help us cope with the pandemic. So right at the top, a little bit of background. It used to be whenever you made a charitable gift, you could write that off your taxes. Well, things changed a couple years ago. What they said is, well, you're going to have an automatic deduction, but the level was set so high, around $25,000, that unless your deductions exceeded that, you didn't get to take a deduction for handing your credit card or sending a check over to your charity. And what made it even more difficult is so-called SALT. You've heard what it is. Basically, it's a cap of about $11,000 on how much you can deduct for your property taxes, for your state income taxes. So there's a big gap between 11 and 25, which most people can't exceed, and therefore they actually got no deduction when they made that nice gift to charity. So recent legislation this year changed that. You can give $300 to your charity, and whether you deduct or not, whether you're over that $25,000 or not, you can take a deduction. And if you're giving as a married couple, $600. Couple caveats. One, it must be cash, okay? It can't be stock or some other property. And although many of us, and we're going to get more into this soon, use so-called donor advised funds. These are funds that are set up at institutions like Fidelity, Vanguard, and Schwab, where you put your money in, you get an immediate tax deduction, but it doesn't go out to the charity until you decide that it goes out to the charity. You're not going to be able to get that $300 or $600 if joint deduction if you put your money this year right into one of those donor advised funds. Couple other changes in the law to benefit charities as Congress realized the pressure they're on. Even if you are itemizing, you can get a deduction for the total amount of your gift up to 100% of your adjusted gross income. Prior to this year, that was capped at just 60% of your adjusted gross income. Anything that wasn't deductible in the current year could be deducted in future years, but as we all know, a deduction today is worth more than a deduction tomorrow. Again, to take advantage of that, it must go right to a charity, not to a donor advised fund. One caveat to note is that if you're giving stock, and one of the best ways to leverage your gift from a tax perspective, instead of giving cash, is to give appreciated stock. Why is that so important? Because the unrealized gain is never taxed and you still get the deduction for the full amount. But there's a cap on that, and that's 30% of your adjusted gross income. That hasn't changed. So one planning opportunity you have is, if your gift, let's say of cash, is going to exceed your income, figure out a way to bring forward your income now so that you can take advantage and deduct your complete gift in the current year. Now, at this point, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Claire. You're in for a special treat because I'm a money manager. Claire is a tax attorney with over 30 years experience, including 12 in the belly of the beast, AKA the IRS. She's written many wills and trusts for people. She used to practice law down at what was then called Harold and Haynes. I think it's the Harold Law Firm too. She's still active with her legal license. And so she really knows the ins and outs of tax law and has many decades of experience advising clients, perhaps like yourself. So with that, I'm going to switch slides and turn it over to Claire.
Thank you, David, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate having you here. One thing David didn't find time to tell you, there is a Q&A button on the screen, so if you have questions, please type them in. We'll see how many of them we can address when we finish this up. David had talked to you about some special rules that apply for this year only. I'm taking a step back and talking about some of the rules that apply this year, next year, going forward. And again, I want to go over briefly what David had said about the Tax Act in 2017, which upended a lot of the way we thought about making deductible charitable gifts. First, as he alluded, the standard deduction, what you get if you don't itemize your taxes, essentially doubled from $12,000 to $24,000 for a married couple. That is inflation adjusted. So this year, the standard deduction is $24,800 for a married couple, about half that for if you're single. There's a bonus $1,300 per person for seniors ages 65 and up, so that a senior married couple has a standard deduction of $27,400. At the same time, a lot of smaller deductions went away altogether. Deductions for getting your taxes done, deductions for your safe deposit box, that sort of thing. The deduction for state and local taxes is capped at $10,000. And that leaves a lot of gap to fill up before you're going to have itemized deductions that exceed $24,800. There's mortgage interest. There's charitable deductions. Some people have investment interest that they pay. And if you really have significant medical bills, you can deduct some of those. But all told, more and more people are taking the standard deduction and not itemizing. So as David was talking about with the CARES Act, how do you manage to get a tax benefit for making charitable gifts while you're taking the standard deduction? And I'm going to cover a couple of them. First, another thing the CARES Act did this year was it eliminated the need for IRA holders to take required minimum distributions. Folks age 72 and above typically are required to take them. That age increased recently from 70 and a half to 72. Or if you inherit an IRA from somebody other than your spouse, you have to take distributions from that inherited IRA regardless of your age. And this year, all of those distribution requirements have been waived. However, they're going to come back next year. So here's some fun stuff to think about. Folks age 70 and a half, you don't have to wait till age 72, are able to direct as much as $100,000 a year of their required minimum distribution to go directly to an operating charity. If that happens, those dollars never show up on the tax return. So it's at least as good as taking a charitable deduction. Plus these folks, these taxpayers still get their full standard deduction. So let me give you an example of how that might look. We've got John and Mary, who are both at least age 72. They have $200,000 of gross income for the year. That includes at least $15,000 of IRA distribution. They don't have a mortgage anymore. They can only deduct $10,000 of state and local taxes, and they do typically give $15,000 a year to charity. So that's $25,000 of potentially deductible expenses they've got. As I had just said, the standard deduction now for a senior couple is $27,400. That's more than their deductible expenses. So they're taking the standard deduction. That gives them taxable income of a little over $172,000 and a tax bill of just under 30. That's federal taxes. So that puts them in the 24% bracket. If instead of doing this, John and Mary take that $15,000 they'd otherwise give to charity and have it directed from their IRA. So they're reducing their required minimum distribution that they have to take into income by $15,000. Can we go to the next slide, David? And this will show you before and after. We're reducing gross income by $15,000. John and Mary still get to take the same standard deduction that they did before, reduces their income. It reduces their taxes by more than $3,000, and it takes them down a tax bracket to the 22% bracket. The charity gets the same amount of money. John and Mary get the same cash flow. In fact, they get a better cash flow because they're paying less in taxes. The only loser here is Uncle Sam. It is important to note that New Jersey doesn't have a charitable deduction, so this is only a federal tax savings. Their New Jersey taxes stay the same. They're no worse off, but they are certainly better off in the federal sphere. David's going to hit on a few additional points here.
Yeah, so I mean, the main takeaway here is if you're going to make a charitable contribution and you have an IRA and you're age 70 or higher, your first instinct should be take it from my IRA because it's going to keep that money out of the tax. And even if you don't empty your IRA before passing along, then it eliminates a potential income for the next generation who might inherit it. So some of the caveats. Again, as we alluded to, well, we mentioned earlier with the $300 or $600 cash contribution, it can't go to a donor advised fund. It must go directly to a place like the VAC, not to, for example, Fidelity Donor Advised Fund. You must be at least 70 and a half to do that. You can't do it, even though now MRDs, minimum required distributions, don't start until 72. You can still do it as early as the old threshold for MRDs, 70 and a half, but you can't do it if you're younger than that. And do talk with your tax advisor if you're still working, deducting IRA contributions for, as Claire likes to call it, funky rules. Bottom line, as Claire so eloquently told you, that for a typical married couple who's taking distributions from the IRA, $15,000 contribution to the charity under one scenario, no tax savings, taking it directly from the IRA, a tax savings of over $3,300. And that's great. Remember, your favorite charity gets the same amount. The only reason you're benefiting is because Uncle Sam is losing. And as Claire pointed out, New Jersey essentially has a flat tax, which means you get no deductions for anything, and that includes making charitable contributions and no benefit from making it directly from your IRA. And at this point, I'm flipping it back to Claire.
Okay, thank you, David. Now, not everybody is in the land of required minimum distribution. Some of us are under the age of 72. So let's talk about ways that non-retirees can manage to take deductions for charitable giving and still take advantage of the enhanced standard deduction. So now we're going to have same John and Mary, but they're younger. They're not retired, so they have the same $200,000 of income. They are limited to the same $10,000 state and local tax deduction. Here they have a mortgage, so we're going to give them $10,000 in mortgage interest, and they're making $5,000 a year in charitable gifts. That totals $25,000. And you may recall I said the standard deduction for a couple like John and Mary is now $24,800. What this means is that although John and Mary are giving $5,000 a year to charity, they're really only getting to deduct $200 of that $5,000 that they're giving. Now, they want to give the money to charity, no doubt, but they really would like a slightly better tax result than just taking a standard deduction. Can Can we move to the next screen, David? Um, and so basically, this is what happens, if they do nothing. They're paying about $30,000 a year in taxes, and if they do, write a check to charity for 5 years in a row of $5,000, their total tax bill is going to be almost $151,000. There's an alternative. David has mentioned a few times what are called donor-advised funds. These are funds that you can set up at any brokerage firm. You can also do it in a community foundation. When you can make a gift to this fund that you create, it's a charitable gift. It's deductible immediately when you make the gift. And typically, we advise our clients to give highly appreciated stock. They get to deduct the full value of the stock as it goes into the donor advised fund. They're never going to pay tax on the capital gains. If you make a large gift today, you can dribble out funds to charity over 5 years, and the charity again gets the same amount of money at the same time it otherwise would. You get a big fat deduction today, and then for the next 4 years you can take the standard deduction. And let's look at what happens if John and Mary do that. Okay, we can keep going. So if John and Mary give $25,000 to their donor advised fund this year, they're bringing their gross income down by more than $20,000. They're reducing their taxes from $30,000 to $25,000 all in the first year. The next 4 years, they're taking the standard deduction. So really, their taxable income is only $200 more than it would be under the old way for those 4 years. But overall, over the course of the 5 years, they're reducing their taxes by more than $4,000. And the big reduction is happening in the first year. Again, the Visual Arts Center or their other intended charity gets the same $5,000 per year over the 5 years, but John and Mary get the whole deduction in the first year and therefore get to build it out. David?
So to summarize, I think what Claire has said, that a couple of strategies here to reduce your tax bite when giving to charity. One is use appreciated stock. Don't use cash, because if you bought the stock for 50, it's now worth 100. If you sell, you're going to have to pay tax on the 50. You're going to have less left to give to the charity. But if you just give the shares intact, the charity gets the same amount. You get the full fair market value of the stock as a deduction, and no one ever pays that unrealized capital gains. And one way to do that in a very efficient manner is to give those shares to your Fidelity or Vanguard or Schwab or charitable giving account, also called a donor advised fund. You just transfer the stock in. They give you a receipt giving you a potential charitable deduction for the full amount. You never pay the unrealized gains. Then it's sitting in that account. And then in the evening after dinner, you may be in your pajamas, you can just say VAC and up magically, because they have all the different charities loaded in there. You'll see their address, their tax ID number, locations, and you just type in the amount, and it goes out without any further work, stamps, envelopes on your part. And so you can put, as Claire said, a large amount in 1 year, and that takes you above the threshold to get the deductions, and then space it out over time. And so this is one of the key strategies that we recommend. At this point, one thing to keep in mind, you get the deduction when the money goes into the charitable giving account. You don't get that second deduction when it's actually paid out either in that year or at any time in the future thereafter. You just get one deduction. And now I'm going to flip it back to Claire.
Okay, so that's what happens with charitable donations during your lives. I want to talk a bit about estate planning. Typically, folks have really focused their estate planning on reducing estate taxes. Well, right now there is no estate tax in New Jersey, hooray. And in order for a married couple to have an estate tax at the federal level, they have to be worth about $23 million together. So if you have an estate tax issue, I would really like to talk to you. For the rest of us, estate tax estate planning is really much more about income tax planning than it is about estate tax planning. And that's because most of the assets you own, your house, your brokerage accounts, the stuff, gets what's called a cost basis step up at death. That means, for instance, if you bought 100 shares of AT&T in 1964 and you've ridden out all of the mergers and the split ups and the back togethers and all of that, you now have stock with the cost basis maybe 50 cents. You don't want to sell that, but at your death, the cost basis of your stock, of your house, of all the stuff you have is the fair market value as of that date. That means your heirs can basically turn around and sell it without paying a tax. This is not the case with IRAs, with annuities, a few other things. However that income stream was treated in your hands, it's treated in your heirs' hands. So for most of us, all of the dollars that come out of our IRAs, our 401ks, are 100% taxable. Maybe we made a few after-tax contributions, but the bulk of it is taxable, and it's taxable as ordinary income at the highest tax bracket we're paying. That's the case when our kids take it or our grandkids take it. Now, in a world where you're going to leave some of your assets to charity and some of your assets to human beings, you are much better off leaving your IRA, your other retirement assets to charity. Yeah, it comes out as ordinary income, but charities don't pay income tax, so they really don't care. And your human being heirs would much rather have the stuff that has a cost basis step up at death. So that's been the case for a few years. Last year's tax legislation, the Secure Act, focused on inherited IRAs and really made this distinction even starker than it is. Can we go on to the next slide, please, David? David, can we advance, please? Thank you. So, if you inherited an IRA from your parent, for instance, in 2019 or earlier, you're required to begin taking distributions out of that IRA over your individual life expectancy. It's a faster payout than you would take from your own IRA. The last year's tax legislation shrunk that payout period even further, reduced it to 10 years in almost all cases. What I've got here is an example of somebody who's age 72, because that's the age at which you have to start taking from your own IRA. So a 72-year-old with $1 million IRA has a life expectancy for this purpose of a little over 25 years and would have to take out $39,000. If it was the first year payout of an inherited IRA, that same person has to use a life expectancy table saying it's a 15.5-year life expectancy. The payout is $64,000. And under last year's tax legislation, you've got to take it out over 10 years. That would be $100,000 if you were taking it out ratably over the 10 years. It gets starker if you're leaving your IRA to your children, to your grandchildren. Under pre-2020 law, a 50-year-old beneficiary, say your child, would have a life expectancy of 34 years. Whereas if you leave it to a 5-year-old, that beneficiary would have a life expectancy of 77 plus years. And that had been a lot of the planning with IRAs. Leave it to the youngest people you possibly can. give them this very long income stream. Can we go to the next slide, please, David? There is some logic to this, and this had been bubbling around in the tax geek world for a while, because my IRA is supposed to benefit me. It's not supposed to create a lifetime income stream for my children. And if there's any comfort in this at all, the original proposal had been that you had to pay out IRAs in 5 years, not in 10 years. I had mentioned there are some exceptions. If your IRA beneficiary is less than 10 years younger than you are, maybe a younger sibling, that person can still use the old life expectancy tables. If you leave your IRA beneficiary to that 5-year-old, the good news is the 5-year-old doesn't have to take distributions out until he or she turns 18, but then that 10-year clock starts running. And those of us with young adult children are looking at them saying, if I got hit by the bus, would I really want my kid to have to recognize all of that income in 10 years? That's not the greatest idea. Charity, sign me up now. I also want to point out for those of us, many of us who have IRAs that we inherited from our parents, if we pass away, that 10-year rule is going to kick in on the inherited IRA as well. And all of this, I mean, again, give your IRA to charity if you've got any kind of charitable intent at all. And beyond that, you really want to do some serious planning for what's going to happen to your IRA at the death of you and your spouse.
So thank you, Claire. That's great. What we'd like to do now is address a couple questions. And, you know, I'm looking at these questions that we have here. I'm actually going to address them to Claire, who is our resident tax expert. So Claire, fasten your seatbelt.
Okay.
One question here is, what if we're not talking about appreciated stock or cash? What if someone has an antique car or a valuable painting on the wall and they want to give that away? How does all this work for someone in that situation?
Well, there are a couple of options. One is that many donor-advised funds will work with non-publicly traded assets. You've got to deal with the custodian, whether it's the brokerage fund or the community foundation, before you make the gift. And then again, you can still deduct the entire value of the gift as it goes in. They get to figure out how to sell it, and it's their problem. The other alternative is if you can give appreciated property to a charity if that property furthers the charitable mission, and still take a full deduction. Otherwise, there are some limits on this. So for example, you could potentially give that highly appreciated painting to the Visual Arts Center and still deduct its full value, because the Visual Arts Center can use it in its charitable purpose. You probably could not give the gas station that you own to the Visual Arts Center and deduct the full value of the gas station. You've got to come up with a different solution for that. So it's all very fact dependent, but there are some basic rules out there.
Claire, we've got one question here, which I think illuminates a potential pitfall in the whole process. Talk to the crowd as to the difference between giving a stock that's doubled that you've held for 11 months versus stock that's doubled that you've held for 13 months. Go through that one.
Okay, and this isn't just about charitable giving. This is also about selling. To deduct the full value of an appreciated stock, or to pay long-term capital gains when you sell an appreciated stock, you have to have owned that stock for at least 1 year and 1 day. If you give it away in less than a year and 1 day, then you only get to deduct what you paid for, what you paid for the security. And if you sell it in less than a year and a day, you have to pay ordinary income tax, not capital gains tax on the appreciation. So it does pay to watch the calendar.
Great, Claire. Well, we've got a lot of good questions, but I think in the interest of time, we're going to just take one more as a very common sense question. You're talking about bunching your deductions and putting it all in this fund up front and then dribbling it out over time. What happens to that money during that time before it's actually given and put to good use by the charity?
That really depends on who's sponsoring the donor advised fund. But most typically, with the brokerage firm, you have a menu of mutual funds, much as you do in your 401k. So you put the appreciated security in the fund, the brokerage firm will turn around and sell it, and you get to choose the mutual funds in which the cash is invested until you give it away. Many brokerage firms, if your fund is sufficiently large, say $250,000 or more, then you can buy individual stocks and bonds in that. I do like to remind people that the point of a donor advised fund is to give the money to charity, not to see how long you can keep it invested. There are plenty of other ways to do that. So in a perfect world, you do want the money from the donor advised fund to go out to charity. And as part of you did remind me, as part of the estate planning with that, if you do have a large donor advised fund, you have a couple of options for what happens to it when you pass away. You can name successor fund managers, or folks to direct the fund, say your children, to allow them to decide what charities would get the assets in the donor advised fund. Alternatively, you can say, well, at my death, then everything in the fund goes to the Visual Arts Center. So they get it in one lump sum, or the charity of your choice.
Great common sense advice. Well, at this point, I think we're going to wrap up, but I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to us. We are always available, whether you want to go to Susan or to us, to help you on these types of topics. I want to thank Susan Yared. I want to thank the Visual Arts Center for helping put this presentation together. And thank you very much for your time. I wish you a great day.